definitely lots to talk about there. But Naëtt, you're not going to start, we're not going to ask you about yourself. Like I stopped you there. Please tell me about the conference. Tell us about the conference, what it means to you. Yeah.
So first of all, thank you very much for having me on the conference, Vikram. I really appreciate that. And I am amazed at how many speakers there are and the infinite wealth of information they have to share from all around the globe, how different they are. When I put forward mediation and creativity, and then I started looking at some of the other videos that's already been on mediation and creativity. I specifically like the one that had Teresa Parnell and Lisa Singh in. That was just a magnetic session. And you had somebody about 2 weeks ago as well who spoke about mediation and creativity, which I just loved. So I think apart from the fact that it is a mammoth task to get all these people together, your admin is incredibly spotless. It's spotless, Vikram. So thank you so much for putting this together and pulling this off.
Thank you very much. It just sounds so nice when someone says that to you. At least they just, I don't know, I think that's what keeps me going. This is exactly what keeps me going. So basically, I mean, my conference started on 18th May, so we're coming to the end of it. So 30th June, we have that on key takeaways, learnings and key takeaways. So you have to be there, Naëtt. You can give us your little, I mean, whatever you took. If you can see some more sessions, much better. So 18th May is Ken Cloke's birthday. We've celebrated with him, and it's also World Mediators Day for me. That's how I'm going to celebrate it. So that's about it. So Naëtt, now it's about you and the topic. So I'm out of the picture. I'll come in as and when you want me to come in.
Please come in whenever you want me to say something. So Vikram, I think the reason creativity is important for me in mediation is, one, I'm a non-lawyer mediator. And I find that when mediators talk about creativity, they often compare it only to the legal profession. And I think that is a mistake we make, because by its nature, the legal profession, and I also find often legal mediators, are way more structured, and this is a way in which it gets done. But I think we limit ourselves and our creative purpose if we just compare it to that. I think if we open up creativity in a much bigger way, then the impact of that on us as mediators and on the people we mediate is just so much bigger. So that's the one thing. The second thing is, I'm in South Africa, and it's a very diverse country. And I found that if I use a creative process, and I'll get back to that later, if I use a creative process, it is almost easier to give everybody a voice. So then the power balances shift. We create more of an emotional construct than who's right and who's wrong construct. So that is what binds. So when we have a creative process that flows, it's the emotion that binds us and not the what has happened and what hasn't happened. So for me, it's very important in any kind of mediation to try and change the story, or at least look at it from a different perspective. And that's why I started being more creative in my mediations. And having said that, I do a lot more. I used to do a lot of divorce mediations. I don't anymore. I do a lot more workplace mediations. But because creativity is often seen as a soft skill, and a soft skill takes more time and it's not that tangible, you have to be within the right space and with the right people to be able to bring creative processes into the space. I think that creativity is time consuming. The things that we historically do, and we do it a lot, and we are used to it, that takes less time. And also it makes us feel safer because we can almost dictate the outcome. We can see it, we control it better. Creativity is messy. But then I also believe that life is messy. And if we allow for creativity, we just have a completely different outcome. I also think that if we create it, we give people back something of themselves that they've lost somewhere. Generally, I don't think we encourage creativity. I think creativity is seen as a nice to have, and we forget that creativity is the bedrock of innovation. And we are scared, I think sometimes as mediators, we're too scared of our own lack of creativity or what we might be doing wrong to actually bring it into our processes. Okay, Vikram, if you have no questions, then I'll carry on.
No, I am listening. Yeah, I'm listening because I'm just thinking that at what point does a person actually start becoming creative? That's the point where we have to see what goes into it, because there is a box sometimes that a person thinks I have to take, and then moving out of that box, thinking out of the box. When does that happen? Also, you'll be able to tell us.
So I think what happens is when we are kids, we are really creative. We live in our imagination. We've got all this time and we make up games, and then slowly as we grow up, we are told what is the right way to do something, and it might not be the right way, but we are told this is the way that fits into society. That's what happens. So we become less and less creative because we are too scared to color outside the lines. And then to get into a space where you're allowed to be creative again, that doesn't form part of your regular daily going. So if you're an artist, you're allowed to be creative. So we have, I think as society, we have these constructs and contexts around certain people. So if you're an artist or a musician, you are allowed to be creative. Oh, I'm so happy there's somebody.
You just said artist. You just said artist, and she is an artist. She is an artist. She'll tell us about herself.
Hello, Rosen. So then people are allowed to, they have creative license, but we don't always only give them creative license. We also give them a license to come up with far out ideas and make some suggestions that we won't expect from somebody that's an accountant. So I think as society, we narrow our own creativity. And then we think, okay, creative people, oh, I'm doing something creative. I'm an artist in my free time, or like in my case, I do ceramics. And then people, so we have a very specific ideas of what we think creativity is and what it is not. Whereas for me, a lot of creativity has to do with how much can you let your imagination run wild? And within letting your imagination run wild, how much can you actually express yourself through different mediums? And that's the bit that takes time. So apart from the fact that it takes time, creativity is very personal. What we feel as creative isn't the same for everybody. What we see as creative isn't the same for everybody. And then with that comes a creative mindset that you need to develop, so that you develop different neural paths in your brain. The more you practice being creative, even if it's just look at, there are many exercises that practice and develop creativity that I don't want to go into now. But the more you creatively you think, then the more creative you become. There's one quote that I absolutely love, and it says, the more interesting and diverse the things and the people around you, the more interesting your own ideas become. And I really like that.
Perfect. Now let's just get Rosen in. Rosen, how am I pronouncing it correct?
No, but I don't expect you to get it. Good afternoon, Vikram, and good afternoon, Naëtt. The way you pronounce it is Roisin.
Roisin, okay, that's interesting.
And it's an Irish word, and it means little rose. So it's Oscoilga, as we'd say in Ireland. So it's actually our native language, and it means little rose. I was named after my grandmother, who was Rose. Anyway.
So basically, I'll tell you what. Okay, you'll have to tell me again.
Roisin. So phonetically, Rosheen. Roisin.
Roisin. I'll tell you what. Without you saying something, let me put this up so that she sees this. This is Roisin's word. Roisin. I'm going to get that. I'm going wrong.
That's Lismore Castle in County
and
Waterford. Yeah.
let me also tell you that she's doing a very interesting exhibition in Iceland, where she's doing an exhibition in a lighthouse. So she'll tell us about that. Yes, Rosh, please tell us about that.
Thank you, Vikram. Yeah, so I think what's interesting, my path to being a mediator was quite diverse. And I think that's what I love about the mediation space. And I think it's incredibly important that we have this conversation around creativity, because expanding our thinking as mediators and being able to move with the people that we talk to move with their needs, but not only move with their needs, but to have your mind active and firing in all directions, because every problem has multiple pathways to an answer, to some kind of answer. So not being linear in our thinking is really important. For me to get here, I went through, so I've been a professional artist since I was 16. I left home at 17. I lived from my art, I put my food on the table, paid my rent. And when I came into my 40s, unfortunately, my marriage broke down. I went through the experience of separation and divorce and didn't like my experience with law. Didn't like my experience, and didn't like as an under, I'm really under sort of scoring. Like it was a horrendous experience. And I was so annoyed with my experience that I did my separation piece first through the courts. And I knew in most countries, like in Ireland, to do divorce, you have to go through the courts. So I took myself back to college in my 40s and I studied a law degree. So somebody who comes in with 100% artistic creativity, no boundaries, no rules, no structure, and to learn law was a shock. But what was really interesting was that I took to law using my artistic skill set in a way that was quite startling, I think, to the lecturers that I had, but also to myself. So when I do a painting, I set out all of my paints, my paintbrushes, my paper. I have an idea in my head, but all of my tools, I set them out first. And then I begin to work. And as I begin to work, it can change. It can shift. It can become something else. And I saw law as that. So when I started studying law, I looked for all of the ways that I could go under the fence or over the fence or around the fence. So for every piece of regulation that I studied, I thought, how would I get around this? How would I circumvent it? How would I change this? My mind goes like that. So when I came to the end of my law degree, which I was doing just to do my divorce, I knew nothing about mediation at this stage. Nobody had mentioned mediation to me, and no lawyer had mentioned mediation to me along this very long journey of going through the legal separation in Ireland. And I had met somebody who said, look, try this mediation training program. So I went and did a 40-hour training program, and all of the lights went on. And I said, oh, hang on a minute. This is me with all my paintbrushes and all my paintbrushes, everything set out, and no rules. And I'm back to where I was before I started studying law. And then I thought, well, this is the way to deal with law. This is the way to deal with the disputes that have a legal context, to go back to the beginning where I was and be completely open and creative. And when I did the mediation training, I knew the law is not the way for people to resolve disputes. So I became a very strong advocate of, please don't go into the court system. Please don't litigate, because litigation is hard and cold and black and white and not just. It's not about justice. It's not about who's right, who's wrong. So I came out of that. I ended up doing a PhD because my lecturer said, no, your approach is so different. Please do a PhD. So I ended up watching 1,200 cases in the circuit court here, which would be our family courts for divorce. So I watched 4,200 people going through that trauma. And I took from that how we should avoid this and what things we could do as mediators to ensure that people don't get there. And then I began to practice when I was doing the PhD. So I've completed nearly 530 cases now. I mediate Monday to Friday every week. It's now my primary professional activity, and painting now was pushed back to the weekends. So I'm still doing the painting because it keeps me absolutely sane. But I now approach mediation as this very diverse wonderful organic space that has to embrace the framework of legal disputes where they come to us. We have to have enough awareness of the context of those disputes, because you do a disservice to your clients if you don't actually understand. You know, if they're trying to get a divorce, there are certain things that have to happen. If they're trying to resolve a business dispute, or as you said, Naëtt, a workplace dispute, there are certain boundaries to that. But I come in with a really wide open, hey, what are we going to do here? What do you need to do? Where are you going? And it's a journey. And I found that the most powerful way to help people begin to think about solutions is to fire lots of possibilities at them, lots of different pathways for every small problem to the bigger problems. Because if you put more possibilities there, people begin to realize that the position that they've taken is not necessarily the only way. And once we move people from thinking this is the one way, this is the one path, these are my rights. When we move people from that, we then begin to explore negotiations and compromise.
Sounds
so
interesting.
That's my path.
Amazing. But the only thing is that the art world hasn't lost you. That's the good part. At least you're doing that. So at least.
No, I realized last year, so much of my energy has gone into the mediation space. And I'm also the chair of the Irish Professional Mediators Organisation. I set up an organisation to look at training standards for mediators to protect the diversity. Because one thing, I heard you say something, Vikram, in one of the other sessions that really alarmed me. And it's what I picked up in my PhD. When I was doing my PhD, I looked at Canada. And one of the greatest tragedies to come to mediation is the polarization between lawyer mediator and non-lawyer mediator. It is destroying the diversity of mediation. And in Ireland, this conversation has started. And we have to stop it. Because I heard with you, Vikram, talking about in India that a mediator has to be a lawyer of 10 years standing. I think,
that was
that correctly?
No, in that situation I was talking about, there is in the court system, there is under the rules there. It was that is one of the provisions I was talking about, because I was trying to compare it to a person who enrolls on the bar and the first day can actually represent someone on the death penalty. But otherwise, if you want to be a mediator in the same court, you have to be practicing for 10 years in the court. I was trying, that was only that comparison. Outside the court system, there is nothing. Even in the courts, there are various things related. This is just one of them, the various criteria, and I mean, it's open to other people also. It's not that it's closed to them. It was just for my convenience in that argument, or that's not called an argument, discussion.
But I think it's so dangerous to. Okay, the way I look at it is mediators should have sufficient legal knowledge of the legal pieces that might arise in the dispute that they're working with in their heads. They are not legal advisors. They are not giving legal advice to clients, but they don't need to be lawyers. They don't need to be barristers. And at the moment, what's happening in Ireland, we've got a discussion around the setting up of the Mediation Council. We've got legislation governing mediation, and now we have a Mediation Council coming into being. And the two legal professions want seats on this Mediation Council because they want to determine the direction of mediation. That can't be, because, one of the things I did was I went back and I studied the barrister at law degree so that I could go in and talk within that space to stop the polarization. And it has helped, but I can see the drive is for the legalization of mediation is the primary drive in many countries that I'm looking at.
No, it's happening here. I mean, of course, I mean, it's not that lawyers are, there's a draft bill. There's actually a bill which has been put into Parliament. It has gone to a standing committee. But the attempt is to get this Mediation Council of India. But at the same time, the government wanting to get its representatives in that. Mediators are kind of sidelined in that. But let me go a step ahead of what you're saying. I've been saying that you said some legal knowledge. I've been saying you don't need any legal knowledge, because law itself has to be fair, equitable, reasonable, everything that you want to say. And if reasonable people sit together and they reach a conclusion that if it's fair and reasonable and just and equitable, that will be the law. And if the law is not that, then challenge that law. I keep it that simple. And if some technical things have to come in, bring in a lawyer as an expert. Why does it have to be you don't have to be a mediator to know the law, to be a mediator. I think I'm going a step ahead. I don't think it's at all required. That's my take.
I think so. So I'll come back to that, because I heard you speaking, and I think this is a really interesting dialogue. So there are many types of mediation that there's no legal context. It's about interpersonal disputes. It's the workplace one, generally speaking, doesn't come out with a legal agreement. It comes out with the resolution of relationships. It can have a legal outcome, but generally speaking, it's not. Disputes between siblings, disputes between grown-up children and their parents, disputes between business partners. They're just trying to resolve relationships. And so that's a form of mediation where any awareness of legal context isn't vital. But if we move into the situation, the greatest uptake of mediation in Ireland is in family mediation. And the greatest desire for mediation is in relation to separations and divorce. So if those people are coming to you and saying, we want to agree our divorce, we want to agree our separation, you have to know enough to know, because only our courts will grant a divorce. Only a judge can grant a divorce. So when I was doing my PhD, the judges got really upset with these mediated agreements that would come in, and the judges would say, look at this agreement, it's completely unenforceable. It's written in language that I can't see any of the pieces that need to be here. It's done in a way that, for example, say one person is really upset and feeling guilty that they had a relationship with someone else and the marriage ended. Frequently at the start of a mediation, I'll have a husband or wife saying to me, let him or her have everything. I was the one that was wrong. I ended up the marriage. They're usually quite distressed when they come to mediation. If you do that as a mediator and they eventually go on to divorce, the judge will say, who did this? Because this conflicts with the law in Ireland. You cannot hand away all of your assets because the Constitution says on divorce, proper provision, both parties have to be provided for out of the assets of a marriage. So there is a tension, Vikram, between.
I'm saying that then in that case, challenge that. If it's in the Constitution, challenge that. If I don't want something, but you have to. I'm just saying that could be one of the options available. I'm not saying, but other options available. You can have a lawyer as a co-mediator if you think. No,
so my answer to that is I have, and I'm taking on, like I've challenged the government, and I've challenged, and I've done lots of academic papers to try and change the law. I don't ask my clients to do that because they want to get their divorce. Yeah. And it's too big a hill to ask them to come up with me. And I say to them, look, let me take on that battle. Let me help you with yours.
Yeah.
So what I've done in cases where it's a mediated agreement and it's a bit out of the ordinary, a bit more creative than a judge would like, within the constraints of the marital regime. So then I would send them with the mediator agreement to a lawyer to just put it into legalese so the judge is comfortable with the content and he can understand it. That's how I worked around that. But I think, Roisin, you came in a bit later. So I've done more than 100 divorces. Mostly now I do workplace stuff and interpersonal stuff, and I do what is called divorce prep, because I found that one of the things that when a couple is getting divorced, and I'm very curious to know how you use your art in your mediations, but during a divorce, couples aren't always that open to creative processes to unlock more. They are open to creative solutions in a way, but I find that sometimes a completely different creative process can actually unlock a host of possibilities that nobody thought about. So I'm very curious to know, obviously you use your art very directly in your mediations, or do you just use the concepts of things might turn out differently and it's not always that clear in a linear way?
Yeah, I'll use it in two ways. I'll use it to around the kind of the theory, the way that I paint, the way that I mediate. I link those together, but also I do child inclusive mediation. So I use my art directly with the children, because I get huge big pages, I'll put them on a table, and we work through parenting arrangements using bubbles and drawings, and because I feel very, very strongly that children, their views must be heard in mediation. If parents are making decisions about them, their views need to be heard. But you need strong protocols around protecting the confidentiality of the children themselves, but also how do you hear their voice? So the younger the child, the youngest one I've worked with was 3.5. So I'll go down. If a child wants to talk to me, I'll talk to a child. So I don't see an age barrier, but the art is very powerful with the children, because all children talk through drawing. I haven't met a child who does, because it's only as we get older we get fearful of expressing. We start to think, oh, that person is the artist, I'm not. Whereas actually we're all artists. So I think we forget that. But children are not, they're fearless in terms of drawing and painting. And but also I find with clients, when they learn that I also paint, they look at me differently. I'm not this unfeeling professional that, you know, is doing a job and getting the money from them and moving on. So they begin to talk to me about the work that I do, and it just opens a different sense of communication between me and them, and that's really useful.
But I think their perception of a mediator, because obviously people might not have experienced a mediator earlier, so that perception, they don't even know what they have to expect.
No,
and
exactly.
They walk in, they have some connection with the legal system, because obviously it's happening in courts and there is some connection there. So thinking that somewhere that attitude is going to be linked there. So I think that's important. Otherwise, to put it out there that, look, mediators, there's a face to mediators, which is what I do. I mean, the idea behind that In Conversation with a Beautiful Mind was just this. Let's just put out mediators. Let people at least hear them and see them, and let's see, they let them have a different perception, because the idea is to get people from all parts of the world, varied kind of thing. That was the idea behind that. But Naëtt, Naëtt, you wanted to come in?
I wanted to say there are two things. One, when I did the divorce mediation, I also included the kids. And one of the most beautiful images ever stays with me, because, you know, you ask those things and you see in the drawings, do they want the mom and dad to get back together again? And then you have a fairly good idea. And this boy was an Italian boy and he was 4. And I said, what is your biggest wish in the world? And he said, that I can hold the moon in my hands. And I just love that. I just love that, and it's an image that I just so love. So I think you came in after. You in between. I'm a complete non-legal mediator. I come from a business background and a bit of a psychology background, but I don't want to study law at all. But I've been mediating for 12 years, and funnily enough, I've actually in this last year did a course with one of your Irish mediators, Jerry O'Sullivan. So I do like to get around. Anyway, so in my process, I actually get the adults, especially if it's a workplace mediation, to do something that is creative. So like you're saying, in some cases, so there's a specific activity that I like quite a lot. If the tension in a workplace is brewing, but it's not overt conflict, then there's an activity with clay, you might know of it, where each participant get a ball of clay and they can build whatever they want to do with it. And during the process, I will take your ball or your whatever you're making and give it to somebody else. And sometimes I would ask if it's okay if I can take it. Sometimes I'll just break off a piece and give that piece to somebody else. Sometimes I'll tell you to swap with somebody. And the process has two things. The one of the thing is that it makes you aware of what triggers you. So we unpack the activity later. What triggers you? Does it trigger you if I just take without asking? So what comes up, and what of those? Is it rudeness and you didn't ask, and I like to control my piece and what it looks like? Am I happy to finish a piece in the way that I think you would like it if we're in the same team, but unhappy if somebody in the finance team takes it over? So it's a wealth of information that comes out in that activity. And what I find is if you just started asking the questions, without a creative activity to set the parameters in a different way, the outcome is very different. So when people relax a bit, there's a psychological safety, there's lots of laughs about it, the outcome is quicker and easier to get to some of the things that sits underneath that. So that's one of the ways in which I use it in a big group setting. And it's I think what often happens is we've got a habitual negative thinking, like you said earlier. How can I make them look at it differently? So if I can just use something to trigger people out of their habitual negative response and get to a different story, for me, that's already very helpful.
I think that's really interesting. I suppose this is a tough job. Let's be honest about this. This is a very tough job. And the reward is so huge. You know, I have to watch myself. I have to be careful that I don't want every case to come to agreement, you know, because I want it so badly for them. I want them to come away from fighting, to get solutions. And the issue for most people is we do slide into that negative space when we're in conflict with somebody, and we've all felt it. When you're in conflict with somebody, it begins to kind of clutter your brain a bit, and you begin to think quite negatively, and then the situation itself becomes a drain on you, and then it grows, conflict grows. And finding ways to break the cycle is really important. Like, I remember one case that was an elderly farmer. He was known to be very difficult, and so I had to ask, what does difficult mean? Because his son had contacted me, and the son said, well, he doesn't like people coming on the land, and if they come on his land, he comes at them with a gun. And I said, okay, that's really difficult. And he said, but my father wants to do mediation. And so I said, okay, let me talk to him. So I talked to the father on the phone, and the first thing he asked me was, he said, you people in the city don't know anything about my life in the country. And I knew straight away I'd have to come at this differently, because if I said, oh, come to my office, you know, the meeting will be at, you know, we'll do meeting. I just thought, okay, I have to drop the process completely and listen here and see, what does this man need? So in the conversation, I explained that years ago I had lived on a farm, that I had worked with sheep. I used to ride out a horse every day. So we bonded over the earth and farming. And then he said to me, I can't come into a room for a meeting. I don't want it. And I said, okay, where do you want to meet? And he said, I want to meet on my farm. And I'm thinking, this is a guy, when you come to his place, comes out with a gun. so I said, could we meet somewhere like a farm, not your farm? Let's meet somewhere that's different. So I picked somewhere that was public. I picked somewhere because I have to think of my own safety. And so he came to this park, and we sat together in the park. And that's how his initial mediation session was started. And he liked the fact that I was willing to change what he knew must be he knew I had to have a process. He knew that there had to be a way I would normally. So he said, to him, the fact that I was willing to go with what he needed, not with what I needed to do as a mediator, for him was the most important part of getting the process started. And it actually worked out really well. He ended up reconciling with his wife, because again, as part of the creative process, we looked at his medication, which I don't think mediators maybe think about, because we found that he was seeing two different specialists. The two different specialists had diagnosed two different things to do with neurology and other issues. And the two sets of medication that he was on were contraindicated. And it resulted in the aggressive behavior that he was exhibiting. And when we got the two consultants to talk to one another, we had to very carefully go around consent and everything, get everything done right. But once the two consultants spoke to one another, they realized they were each prescribing medication that was creating the aggression. So once that was gone, the aggression was gone, and these two were okay. These people were okay. So I think my learning from that is, I presume nothing. I am open to all possibilities as to where we go. And I'm still mindful that they may need I need to know enough about the legal framework if that's the nature of the dispute they have.
But Roshan, being an artist, one is that you start with a blank canvas and you have nothing in mind and draw or paint as you go along. What about the artist who has something in the mind and then is trying to put things together? How does that work in the mediation?
Well, okay. Well, I think the way I look at that is if a client rings me and says, my wife and I, we want a divorce, then I know that's where I need to go. That's where they need to go. So in the way that if I'm doing a painting, for example, the exhibition that I'm going to open on Friday in Iceland, that came about because I went on a trip to Iceland, went to this little lighthouse, had a conversation with a very interesting man in the lighthouse, discovered that in 840 AD, Vikings left from my town, went over to this village and established a settlement, taking slaves who are my people in 840 AD. So I felt really connected to this lighthouse and these people because I can trace my family back to the 9th century where I live. And so I felt, well, you took some of my people and you are my people. So I was explaining to him, we are connected. And so I wanted to do paintings to reflect that connectivity. So I knew I was creating paintings of Iceland and Ireland. So I knew what I was going to do.
Can I open one of them? This one is sold, you said.
This is sold. Ireland. Yeah.
Already sold. She's already sold
already,
this. Yeah, she sold this. Naëtt, you can't pick this up. It's already sold.
I'll have to pay you a fee as an agent.
Yeah.
Well, I'm so happy that you have a person who is also an artist and a mediator, and combining the two in terms of thought process. I think it's lovely. I think.
I think. Sorry. Yes.
No, it's because I'm a ceramicist, so that's where the clay activity comes from. Because I also find clay is forgiving. So it's using that as.
But then Naëtt, let me tell you, my wife is also a ceramicist. All these pieces at the back are always hers.
Fantastic, Vikram. Yeah. So the other thing I found about is that when you were saying you had to adjust your process, for me, creativity in mediation is on 3 levels. It's us as mediator, how creative we allow ourselves to be, and that includes the process. Are we open to? I often do walking mediations, specifically for people who don't want to sit in an office, who feel claustrophobic or whatever. So are we allowing ourselves to be creative? Are we allowing ourselves to be creative with the process? And do we elicit creativity from the participants? So for me, it's a multi-level space that creativity takes. I don't know what you think about that.
In terms of the location of the mediation, definitely you have to be creative enough to, I think, I've enjoyed it doing outside, even on my golf course, sitting outside. So I think the whole idea of being that there informality aspect, I'm not going to let go of that for sure. Whatever other boxes there are around, people do it. For me, that doesn't work. I don't know, Roshan, what about you?
Well, I think for me, COVID and moving to Zoom was the most freeing experience for me as a mediator, which might sound strange, but I was able to, pre-COVID and post-COVID, I looked at how I was working. So pre-COVID, I spent a lot of time in my car getting to places to meet people, because people wanted me to do work with them that were all over the country. And I kept on going to do the work because I felt, well, they need me. But if I look back on it, I spent so much of my time sitting in traffic, and I don't want to be sitting in traffic. My life is too short, and I want to really enjoy life as much as I can. So Zoom was incredibly freeing because I did a mediation from Iceland. I've done a mediation sitting out at a small little summer place that I have. I just think and also the clients, for them, huge, because I had clients that I had before the lockdown and they came through with me onto Zoom. And I asked them, how do you feel about face-to-face mediation versus Zoom? And all of them said they preferred Zoom. And I asked why. And they said, because we're in our comfortable place. We're at home. We're in a room that we choose. We're in a space that we choose. And all of the dynamics that were there in face-to-face joint sessions that I had to be very careful about. So when people get upset and they're in a joint session, and I'm sure you've both experienced this, there is always the potential for somebody to get upset and walk out. You know, it's what human beings do. We get up and we move out of the space. So it was something I was always having to monitor. That hasn't happened at all on Zoom, because
Really?
they're already, yeah, not once. There are in.
I had one person who switched off and said, "I'm out of here." Okay, that's very interesting.
Yeah, so I think it's more. What I've noticed is that they're not physically in each other's space, and also a really important thing is they're not sitting beside each other or looking at each other. They're looking at themselves, looking at me. And I've noticed that people looking at themselves on the screen are much more conscious of how they are being. And so I found that clients post-COVID on Zoom are more relaxed. They're more open to discussion. They're more conscious of themselves. They have greater awareness. And they feel they have greater control over what's happening or how long they stay in the session. And they don't have to go through any stress of getting to where the mediation might be, or leaving it, or parking, or any of those things, or finding babysitters for the kids. They can put the kids in the next room. Like, I found Zoom to be incredibly creative for me as a mediator, and using the. Sorry.
Well, on the aspect of them looking at themselves, I find some people get a little too conscious about that. So I do tell them to hide that self view that you have, that option that you have. Like right now, my view is hidden, so I don't see myself. So I find that easier. And I see some people do get a little conscious, and they're looking at themselves. They're distracted. So that sometimes I have to tell them to do that. So I find that something which helps for me. I mean, sometimes it's better that they're not so conscious about themselves.
Interestingly, CEDAR did a study, and they found that in very contentious, more sort of commercial disputes, if it was on Zoom and the person who was doing the statement was the only one with the camera on, that person was way more confident because they couldn't see the reaction on the faces of the other people and they couldn't hear them, which I found very good, because generally if you have an opening statement around the table, you can see people rolling their eyes and doing this or that. So because they were the only people on the screen, it was that they were more confident. One of the things I found with the Zoom sessions is, as a point of connection, is the backgrounds, because I don't have so I move around quite a bit. And then people that I do a different session, prolonged sessions with, they will go, "Oh, you're in a new place. What's that thing behind you?" So I think the human aspect that we were talking about earlier was probably easier through Zoom, because the dogs would bark and they would storm out, and I would often have to, I think people get more used to you as a person who also has a daily life and a home life, as opposed to just in your professional black outfit in your office kind of thing. So I definitely found that there was a connection that came through Zoom that we didn't anticipate. And I like working through Zoom, yeah.
I think that informality aspect that I'm saying, I think that should be something part of it. But the other thing, Naëtt, that came out from this was we have to be creative in the words that we use, because we had a session on terminology and mediation, and Jeannie was talking about, she works in community mediation, that opening statement, all that comes from the court system, because the mediation, they came out of the court system. She says orientation, don't call them parties, call them participants. So I found that, I think that I'm moving to that. I like that aspect. That's not.
I also like that, yeah.
And you see what you were saying there about CEDAR and about this opening statement. You see, and this is what I'm trying to get across to our organization that I'm kind of getting going. That's one model. And it is a model that came directly from the legal system. So it's the legal system coming into mediation. But there are multiple models. And this is what I'm really trying to stress to mediators around the world. There are 15 core models and about another 25 models beyond that. And I can create a new model tomorrow. I think what we must do is protect the diversity of the offering. For example, if somebody wants to have a certain kind of mediation and they know this mediator is that kind of person, that's where they go. And then if they say they want something more formal, more structured, they know this mediator does that, let's go there. And I think the choice must always be with the users. And I think mediators must be very clear about what are they offering. Because one of the big issues that I can see is that, for me, mediation should be mainstream. Mediation should be what people think about before they ever think about a courtroom. A mediator should be the first call, not the solicitor. So we haven't changed that culturally in any country that I've been looking at.
And definitely not in South Africa. Mediation is not well known at all.
Yeah, and not in Ireland. And now Ireland is doing some really interesting things. We have brought in a mediation act. It didn't get initiated by mediators or by lawyers. It was actually the Law Reform Commission on behalf of the people of Ireland said, hey, you people out there mediating, you're all over the place. You've got all different kinds of level of training. We don't know what you're doing, but you're doing agreements that are coming into the courts. So the Law Reform Commission said, let's get a framework around this. And the good piece about the framework is it protected mediations that have no legal outcome and mediations that are intended to have a legal outcome. So it allows for both. So the diversity is protected. But what we have to be very careful of as you move into this form of regulation, that it isn't driving it back into a legal framework or structure, because it shouldn't be. It's a different thing.
What are we going to discuss in the next session? This is the next session that you're talking about. This is where you have to, this is a little bit of drawing the line.
I know.
We are going to talk about this. Very important what you're saying. So this is, So
I want
creativity.
One thing off here, which I actually just saw. So one of the other things I use quite is part of the getting people out of their story, but also to getting them for me to understand what is underneath the words, or what are the words that is, if there's a team mediation. So this is just one example, and it can be either way. So I have 20 of these that I made myself, different collages, and then there's some questions on the back. But what I would do then is say, okay, so tell me the story. Tell me the story of what's currently, you use this, tell me who's the main character, what does this represent, what's going on there. And then through that, they come up with a story of a narrative of what's going on. And I've used it very, very successfully in groups of up to 8 people. And it's fascinating to see where the stories diverge completely and who feels left out, without actually directly saying, this is me and you did that to me. So I use it extensively in groups, and it's always interesting for me to how easily they claim it. I've not had one person who say, no, sorry, I don't want to do that. I think one of the things I've discovered is that actually when adults get the opportunity to play, and when it's psychologically safe to play and we let go of the criticism, they love playing. They love playing. Love having the opportunity to just draw whatever they feel like, or do with clay, or do with words, or physical games, anything like that. We love that. But we've put so much criticism on ourselves that this is right and this is wrong and this is a waste of time. It's that this is a waste of time. Where is it going? What is the linear process of this? What is the outcome that we can tick with this? Instead of just actually the outcome is that our brains start firing differently. We're going to look at different perspectives, and then we're going to see things in a different way.
It's basically bringing out the inner child. And once that inner child is out, things become a little easier there. So definitely. Yeah. We've had some interesting sessions. There was Kathy Porter who spoke about poetry. She uses poetry in, of course, there was some climate change discussions, and she had used that there. So I think people are doing some interesting work there on various aspects, which of course is available on YouTube on my channel, that Kathy Porter session. This is, and one in the last symposium also, she spoke about art and mediation. So lots happening there. So Rohishin, I'm sure there is more that you can tell us about the creative process in relation to. Yeah.
Well, I think what you're doing is really creative, because this idea of having this sort of extended conference and talking to different mediators, this is extraordinarily creative. And the fact that it's out on, because I've already linked to you on LinkedIn, because just these conversations are helping other people, like lawyers or barristers or professionals, listening to us and actually trying to get a better understanding about our space. That in itself is a really creative piece. So congratulations to you for doing this.
And look, and this whole creative piece actually developed organically. I started saying that, okay, I'll do it on Wednesdays and Saturdays, called people together, give me a topic. So it was their paint where it had to go. It just, I mean, just that's the way it happened. People came, gave their topics, and the whole, whatever, call it a painting or whatever, it just got painted by them. I mean, I would just put the canvas out there and call them in. So that's how it is.
Yeah, and I think what it's telling me is, I think mediators need somewhere to talk to one another, you know, because and also to explain our different approaches, because the greatest drawback is the diversity of mediation, because it's so hard to explain to the public. And if you can't tell the public what you do in a clear enough way, we can't expect the public to say, oh, I'll do mediation because I know what it is. So it's a really tough piece that we have to get our heads around, to show the public this is an incredibly flexible and open process, and yet it is a process, and it is, here's what it can do, here's what you can achieve, I still haven't figured out, but I do know that these conversational pieces, because when you started doing this, Vikram, that's what I was thinking of doing, was a series of in conversation with, and I've lined up a group of peacemakers around the world, not necessarily just mediators. Like Abby Abernathy she's a Native American judge in California, and she's done incredible work with peace circles, and she crosses over into mediation. So I'll follow on from you. I'll take my lead from you, but I think we need to keep this global conversation going, because it'll help us to think creatively about how do we bring what we do to potential users. How do we encourage them? How do we get them to have confidence in this space? And I think that's the
only thing is that you're not going to call it In Conversation with a Beautiful Mind, are you? That one I've got. That one.
No, I think that's gone already.
Or maybe let's just see. Maybe people can use that. Let me see how that works. But look, the idea also there was that let's get people who are maybe, I mean, every corner of the world. I like you keep talking about this person in Siberia. I mean, that actually two people who from Siberia. I just like to say Siberia because people might, I mean, when you're growing up and you're studying geography, do people actually live in Siberia, kind of thing? So, and such nice people there. So someone sitting there who's actually, I mean, in a way, they're doing good work there, which otherwise gets lost. So there is a mediation world which has talking about a lot of, I'm sure, good things about the process and everything, but a lot of voices do not come out. So the idea was to give everyone a voice, and everyone has that important voice. That's the best part about the whole thing. And the whole concept was, when I started, I said, look, let me just get together 1,000 people with the mediator mindset and let them reach out to 1,000. So we have 1 million people out there. That's all it was. But of course, people don't have that much time. And they're, of course, doing various things, because mediation by itself is not giving them the livelihood that it should. So they're not being able to go further up the chain or down the chain, which is now some activity which I've planned out, which I need to do that on. But let's just do that. Roshan should have a YouTube channel, should be having these conversations, conferences, everything. So much to talk about. But the only thing that you spoke about this, Judge, there is a symposium coming up on 9th of August. Which starts on 9th of August, on Indigenous peoples and mediation. So please, we have to have whoever you can reach out to. Let's bring in as many people as we can. It's called it's basically the International Day for the Indigenous Peoples, whatever.
Because I was involved in a symposium of Indigenous peoples. It was a US symposium, and I was invited to speak. And I was invited to speak as an Indigenous person from Ireland, but I had to explain to the symposium, we have two original or Indigenous peoples in Ireland, and obviously over the years that's been very mixed. But we have travellers who are a very closed off group in Ireland, about 30,000 people now, And then we have the Irish population, you know, that would have, like as I said, I can trace my roots back to the 9th century. But I think, yeah, there are things just on the creativity piece. I've been involved in Native American circles and seeing how they use very old traditions and methods to do, there's things that we can learn as the mediators from older ways of resolving conflicts. Like the whānau approach in New Zealand, which is elder mediation within families, you know, where the community comes together to resolve disputes. And that is what led into family mediation in New Zealand. That's how it developed. So it came from whānau, which was the Maori tradition, which is very, very old. So there are things that we've forgotten as peoples, and we need to look again and bring some of these pieces into the work that we do now as mediators. It'll help us be more creative in how we approach our work.
So you have to work with me on that. Get me as many people as we can. Naëtt is going to look at people from South Africa, wherever else. I mean, there is so many people that we can bring together, and the people who are actually practicing it, and all those traditional things should not get lost, which is what I tried to do in that symposium that I keep talking about so much about. My symposium, August, September, and I have to boast about it. Someone called it the Woodstock of mediation, and I was so happy. Yeah, there were 97 speakers from 45 countries. I mean, I keep saying, does it get any better? Does it get any bigger? So the idea there was to connect people to a process which they're familiar with, rather than throw this whole technical thing on their head. The look, we've come up with something and we are going to do something so different with you. No, just connect them to that. So that's the whole idea behind this symposium also. Let's get that. I mean, this is actually people who are practicing it. If we can try and bring them, some people have said we'll try and bring some people in who are actually practicing it there. So I think there'll be some interesting things that will come out of that. So
yeah, well, I will definitely link you, because one of the reasons I got invited to that was that a young girl here that I've been assisting to get trained as a mediator, and she's from that Indigenous community, it's Traveller people, and I found when I went to a conference in America, I was at a circle of peace with Native Americans, and there was a man there who had the same surname, but he was a judge, an American judge. So I asked him, did he know who his ancestors were? I'm obsessed with the past. I just love knowing all of my people's people, just because it gives me a sense of purpose. But his name was quite distinctive, and he said, no, I don't. And I said, can you do a little bit of homework and I'll help you? And then we discovered that the girl that I was helping here in Ireland was his cousin. Wow. So he came to Ireland, and he is working with Native American tribes across North America with peace circles and alternative methods of dispute resolution. He's an extraordinary man, and I will connect you with him. His Judge Tim Connors, Michigan. Perfect. But he's an extraordinary man, and he's been honored by the Native American community for the work that he's been doing. He was recently given awards, but he is all about creativity, and yet he's a judge. And he understands that the courtroom is the least creative environment, but he does his best to break the barriers and the boundaries and the edges of what that space might be as well.
Yeah. But only thing is that our issue here is that we'll have to just conclude right now. I'll start the next session. We can continue this conversation. I have no problem. Only thing is, like I keep saying, social media thinks that you've canceled the event if you don't start it on time. So just a quick one, Naëtt, just a concluding kind of thing, and then we'll move to that.
Thank you, Vikram, for the session and for putting it together. And I think as mediators, we can be as creative as possible. For me, the only constraint always would be the confidentiality. Yes. Keep that within those lines. We can color as widely as we want to. And my second thing is always do no harm. And Roisin, it was lovely to meet you. And I actually come from O'Farrell. My mom's side is O'Farrell from Ireland. Okay.
Well, we'll have to find out where.
Yeah, we'll have to find out where. So thank you very much for having me, Vikram.
Thank you very much for suggesting the topic and, of course, participating. Roisin, do you want to any closing kind of thing that you want to say? Then we'll
No,
start
I'm delighted to have met the two of you, and I think this is the beginning of our conversation. Not
exactly,
the end.
exactly. That's what I keep saying. This is the
Yeah.
30th won't be the last in the session, but that's the starting point of discussions, because the idea is to take these forward. So I'll just cut this. Thank you very much, both of you, and of course, enjoyed the conversation.